Hello guys, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Married with Suki and Azula Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button, check description and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Snowflakes slowly drifted from the overcast sky, lazily twirling through the air to land on the surface of the water beneath it. The prow of a small boat cut through the water. The rhythmic splashing of an oar hitting the sea was joined by the humming of the one sitting in the boat. The man in the boat sighed to himself, shaking his blonde hair free of snowflakes. I hope I reach the southern water tribe before nightfall, he muttered to himself. It's always a bad idea to be out on the water when the snow starts falling. His blue eyes fell into a deadpan look. And I'm going to go crazy if I don't find someone else to talk to. It turns out I'm a horrible conversationalist with no one else around. Who knew? Adjusting the dark orange scarf around his neck, the young man continued rowing, humming a tuneless melody. Jumping slightly as his boat came to a sudden stop, the blonde man broke out into a wide smile, the whisker-like marks on his cheeks stretching. Before him lay a large, flat iceberg, and just within his vision he could spot a white wall. The wall was definitely not made by the wind, not unless a wind spirit liked making lookout towers for some reason. Easily hopping from the small wooden boat, the man proceeded to pull it on top of the ice, withdrawing a large pack that he hefted onto his back with minimal fuss. Don't go anywhere, he said jokingly, patting the boat like a pet. Setting off towards the distant encampment, the man whistled and would skip every couple of steps, his pack jingling. Halt! A young voice cried as he approached a hole in the wall. Who goes there? Spotting a pair of children peeking at him over a pile of snow, the young man waved and smiled brightly. Hello there. I'm just a wanderer, looking for shelter and trade. He paused when he noticed that the pile of snow had blue eyes that were narrowed in suspicion. Is there an adult I can speak to? One of the kids pushed the other and whispered something to her. She scrambled away as the blonde man carefully stepped closer. The pile of snow burst as a young, lanky teen popped out of it, holding a water tribe club above his head threateningly. Don't come any closer or the warriors of the water tribe will make you regret it. Taking the step back, the other man held his hands out and open. Easy there, I'm not looking to make any trouble, he said soothingly. Sokka, an elderly voice called out, stop threatening the man. Don't you have a wall to rebuild? Gran, Sokka whined, his arms falling, I'm trying to be fearsome. Gran silently pointed away, and the young man sighed and trotted off, but not before shooting the blonde wanderer another suspicious look and pointing at his eyes, then pointing at the man in a very clear, I'm watching you, gesture. The other man quirked an eyebrow at the retreating Sokka before smiling at the elder. Hello there. I don't mean anyone any harm, I'm just a wanderer. I'm looking for a place to stay and trade, that's all. Gran looked at him closely, and then nodded. What is your name, young one? Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. The blonde man bowed low, his pack sliding up and smacking the back of his head. My name is Naruto, though I go by Sun. The elder's eyes rolled up to look at Sun's shock of bright blonde hair. I can see why, she muttered, before looking at him straight. You are welcome to stay, though I'm afraid we don't have much in the way of trading. Sun bowed again, this time making sure his pack didn't slide. Thank you very much. I don't have much to trade either, but I'm willing to work for a bed and meal. He remarked easily, following the old woman as she walked into the main area of the Southern Water Tribe. That would work. Can you sew at all? She asked, leading him to a tent. I'm not the best at it, but sure I can. I repair my own clothes regularly. Sun replied, ducking into the tent, coming upon a scene of several girls, all wearing Water Tribe furs, work to repair a fishing net together. They paused as the stranger entered their midst with Gran, who proceeded to introduce him. Ladies, this young man is Sun. He will be helping us, though I did forget to ask, how long will you be staying here? The last part was directed at him. He sheepishly smiled and rubbed the back of his head. Well, I don't really know. I kinda just wander. I'll do my best not to overstay my welcome, though. Gran nodded and directed him to sit next to a young woman who wore her brown hair in simple bun that connected to loops from her bangs. Setting aside his pack and taking up a needle and thread, the blond man got to work on the net. Hi there. What's your name? He asked cheerfully. The young woman, who had the usual tan skin of the water tribe, though with deep, emphatic blue eyes, smiled nervously at Sun. I'm Katara. It's nice to meet you. His easy smile that reached his bright blue eyes did much to soothe her suspicion. No one could smile like that and not mean it. It's nice to meet you, too. I like your scarf. She complimented with a small smile. I like your hair loopies, he replied with, returning the favor. Sun settled in and got to work, occasionally flinching in pain when he inevitably pricked his fingers. Here, you should hold the needle like this, Katara interjected, nudging the blond man to get his attention. Sucking his finger, Sun observed as the tribal held her needle in a different way, noticing that she was well practiced and very quick with her motions. Shifting his grip, he smiled as the task became easier and far less painful. Thanks, Katara. Is there anything else I'm doing wrong? He held up the length of net he had been working on to show it to her. The other girls, who had been subtly watching the bright-haired stranger, took that opportunity to chime in. Later, after the net had been fully fixed and stored away, Sun sat around a large campfire with the Southern Water Tribe, gleefully telling them tales of his travels with minor embellishments, and enjoy a bowl of delightfully salty stewed sea prunes. So, after the last one falls, I look up to see that their leader has abandoned them and is running away with his tail between his legs and the governor's daughter over his shoulder. He explained, hunched over the fire for dramatic effect. And so, in one mighty leap, I jumped the distance and landed on his head, making him throw the girl in the air and trip, hitting his head on a rock and knocking him out. I caught the girl and stood over his unconscious form and declared, Sun puffed up his chest and posed. You really should have quit while you were ahead. Giggles erupted from the gathered kids, joined with the chuckles from the older women. All right, you little penguin hatchlings, Gran started, a smile on her weathered face, that's enough excitement for one night. Time for bed. Ah, a chorus of sad voices piped up, but the women would have none of it, and hustled the younglings off to bed. Do you mind if I make some tea? Sun asked, taking a seat between Gran and Katara and reaching for his pack. Of course, go ahead. He retrieved a battered kettle from his pack and scooped a good amount of snow inside of it before setting over the flickering fire. Do you have any preference? The blond man questioned, opening the top of a white teapot. I particularly enjoy white jasmine on colder nights. Gran smiled thankfully and nodded. That would be wonderful, thank you. As the water boiled, the rest of the tribe, now bereft of children, circled around the fire again. That was an interesting tale you made up, Sun. Katara commented, rubbing her hands over the flames. Where did you get it from? Silence answered her. Looking at the friendly blond man, she was surprised to see a bemused smile on his face as he blinked blankly. Made up, he finally uttered, automatically retrieving the kettle when it whistled. Sokka nodded. Well, obviously. No one could jump as far as you did in that story. He explained, giving the confused Sun a look that said, Are you dumb? While his hands were occupied pouring water into the pot and adding the leaves, Sun glanced around the fire and saw similar, though less apparent, looks on their faces. I didn't make that up. I really did that, he insisted, stirring the tea. The only other male rolled his eyes. Oh really? You defeated a gang of earthbending bandits all by yourself. Sun thrust a piece of paper at Sokka with a dissatisfied frown. On the paper was the sketch of a thickly muscled man with a bald head, except for a topknot and a large, pointy beard. Next to his face was several words, reading, Wanted, Gonjo the Rockslide, and under that was a stamp with a seal, meaning the person on the poster had been brought in and the bounty paid. Following that, Sun handed a piece of stationery with a broken wax seal. It read, "Dear Sun, I want to thank you again for rescuing me from those bandits and bringing me home. If you're ever in the area again, please visit my estate and come see me again. Love, Kaya." Next to the signature, which was encapsulated within a heart, was a mark made by lipstick-covered lips being pressed against the paper. Sokka read both the poster and the letter out loud, and when he finished, every one of the tribals had wide eyes, and were looking at the blonde man with no small amount of awe. "That was real?" Katara asked incredulously, accepting a cup of tea from Sun. Sun nodded, taking the papers back. "Yeah, I wouldn't make something like that up, though. There were only 6 bandits with the leader, not 10. I rounded up on that." Sokka shook his head rapidly, crossing his arms. "Okay, so the bandits and the girl were true, but I'm saying no way to the leaping." He protested loudly. Sun glanced around the tribe, spotting the snow-built watchtower standing above the wall. "All right, I'll prove, Ponytail. See that tower?" He pointed. As they looked, he quickly stood and disappeared in a blur. "What about my mighty tower, Sun where'd he go?" the other boy questioned. They all whipped around just in time to see Sun, with his orange scarf and white cape fluttering in the wind as he sailed through the air, alighting on top of the tower and waving down at them. Despite the spindly appearance of the mighty tower, Sun stood on it with sure footing, and it didn't collapse. Kneeling, he leapt into the air again, nearly flying through the air to land in his previous spot with only a small puff of snow. He bowed grandly to the awestruck water tribe with a wide smile. "How did you do that?" Katara asked in amazement. Are you an airbender?" Sun blinked, taken aback. No had discerned that so quickly. "Well, I've never been formally trained," he admitted, "kind of a hard thing to do when all the airbenders are not here anymore." "But you are one," she insisted, looking up at him with hopeful eyes. Sighing, Sun nodded and held out his hand. Air became visible as it swirled in his palm, and the gathered tribals gasped. "But I'm not just an airbender," Sun said with a small frown. The air swirled in his palm violently before they erupted into a ball of sunny yellow flames, shining in the dark like a beacon. The water tribe drew back in shock as Sun clenched his hand, extinguishing the flames. You, Gran murmured, her eyes wide and jaw slack. "I know what you're going to say," he cut across quickly, shaking his head. "I'm not the Avatar." "How do you know that?" Katara asked, somewhat desperately. Sun shrugged helplessly. "I dunno. I just feel it. Besides, I don't have an animal familiar. And I'm not over 100 years old. And I've never heard of the Avatar being able to bend things other than the elements." To demonstrate, he retrieved a seed from one of his pockets and held his hand out. His other hand hovered above it, making small twirling and beckoning motions, and before their very eyes, a green shoot emerged from the seed, roots crawling over his hand and hanging through his fingers as a white lotus bloomed in his palm. Sun held it out to Katara, who took it gingerly, staring at the very real flower in her hand. "How?" was all she could say. Sun shrugged. "I dunno, comma." The crescent moon rose into the sky, hanging over the South Pole like an amused grin of some nearly invisible creature. Sitting beneath it with his legs crossed, Sun breathed deeply and slowly, trying to focus his thoughts. "I shouldn't have showed them that," he muttered, opening his eyes to gaze at the dark horizon. "I've always had a problem with showing off. I blame my master." Glancing to his side, Sun could very nearly see the blue haze of a spirit with wild hair and a long tail, pointing and laughing at him, rolling on the floor in mirth. Glaring, Sun smacked some snow at the haze, dispelling it. Taking a deep breath, he flopped onto his back and sighed explosively. "The spirits have led me here for some reason," he murmured to the moon. "Why? What is so important at the South Pole that requires my attention?" The moon didn't answer. He wasn't in the North Pole, after all. Before anyone really knew, 2 weeks had passed since Sun had arrived in the Southern Water Tribe. And to them, It seemed as if he had always been there. His presence, attitude and personality attracted them like moths to a flame, without the threat of being burned. Even Sokka, ever paranoid, had warmed up to the blonde man considerably, though the pranks had put a dampener on that. And then there were the pranks. Sun had taken to setting up harmless little traps around the tribe, and had even gotten the little kids in on the fun. There wasn't a day that went by that didn't have Sokka step into a rope that whipped him up into the air and dunked his head into a bucket full of mashed seaweed, or a tripwire that launched a snowball filled with sea prune jelly at his face. Even Katara got in a few pranks. And then there was Katara. The young woman approached an oddly quiet Sun as he sat near the sea, his back turned to her. "What are you doing?" she asked. The blonde man yelped in surprise and jumped, flinging the ball of water held between his hands up into the air where it lost shape, raining freezing cold water down on them. "Oh, sorry," he apologized with an embarrassed blush, twisting his wrist and bending the water off of them. "You know how to bend water?" she asked with a hopeful look on her face. Sun nodded with a small smile, his arms flowing as a tendril of water rose from the surface and floated in front of him. Snapping his hands, the tendril took shape and quickly froze as a lily made of ice, which he presented to Katara with a smile. "A pretty snow flower for a pretty snow flower," he flirted with a friendly wink. Blushing, the young woman cleared her throat, holding it out to him. The reason I ask is," she trailed off as Sun snapped part of the stem off and tucked the ice bloom behind her ear. "Ahem, is because I'm a waterbender, too." "Really?" the cheerful man asked, looking excited. "Show me." Taking what she felt was the right stance, Katara waved her arms, concentrating on the water, a small tendril poking from the surface and waving about. Slowly, it floated into the air, forming into an orb, before slowly thinning out into a hoop of water. It dropped back into the water with a splash and a disappointed huff from Katara, who turned to Sun, expecting an unimpressed look. Sun gaped at her unabashedly, eyes wide and glittering. "You've never been taught?" he asked slowly. She shook her head, and the blonde's jaw fell even farther. "Wow," he yelled, "that's really impressive. I could barely get to water to ripple when I started out, and you can do that. Imagine if you got a teacher." Blushing at the unexpected praise, Katara rubbed her arm sheepishly. "You really think so?" "Yeah," Sun replied excitedly. "Oh man, I wish I had known, I would have brought my waterbending scrolls." The blonde man flopped on the ground suddenly, cupping his head. "I didn't think I would need them, I'm so sorry." He apologized tearfully. Sun quickly leapt back up, taking her hands in his and bouncing in place. "But I do know how to waterbend, and I can teach you." He was suddenly crouching, drawing a circle in the snow, dejectedly muttering, "But I'm not very good, what if I teach you wrong and you get hurt?" "Oh, I couldn't take that." He popped back up and clasped her hands again. "But I will do my very best to help you on this road." Katara blinked rapidly, confused as to how someone could have that many mood swings in 10 seconds. "Wait, you'd really teach me?" she asked incredulously. Sun nodded rapidly, his blonde hair shaking as he silently held 2 thumbs up. "Thank you," she cried, lunging forward and wrapping her arms around him in a tight hug. After a few seconds, Katara quickly withdrew with red cheeks and looked away from Sun, coughing in embarrassment as the blonde man cleared his throat, his face also flushed. "So, yeah, when do you want to get started?" he asked, rubbing the back of his head. "Right now," she answered enthusiastically. And so, that was how Katara found herself a waterbending teacher, albeit not a master. Sun taught her the best he could, though he warned her that most of what he knew was self-taught. Along with using water as a whip, he taught her how to create a shield made of ice, and make ice, and how to skate, though that was with bending. Katara already knew how to ice skate, she lived in the South Pole. It all led up to the situation they now found themselves in. Katara, along with Sokka and Sun, had gone on a hunting trip around the pole in a canoe. Taking this as a learning opportunity, the blonde man began teaching the lady among them how to catch fish using bending. Think of where the fish will go, he instructed, gently leading Katara's hand. Subtly use the currents to direct the fish where you want it to, and when it arrives. She clenched her hand and pulled it up, trapping a large silver fish in a bubble above the water. Yes, she cheered, trading high fives with Sun. Their parade was rained on by Sokka, who had not been paying attention and was focused on another fish in the water, drawing back his spear to spear it. The butt of his spear popped the bubble, dropping water on top of them. Sun quickly snatched their catch out of the air and stored it in a box filled with ice, turning an annoyed look on Sokka along with Katara. You just had to use your magic water mumbo jumbo and now I'm soaking wet, and we don't have any fish. He complained, pointing the butt of the spear at the two of them. Sun snorted and bent the water off of him and Katara, who nudged open the box to show her brother that they had caught 6 fish between them, which was 6 fish more than him. Before she could speak up to berate him, the canoe jerked, throwing them to bottom as it got caught up in a fast current that swept them through a treacherous course of flows. Managing to sit up, Sun quickly bent the water and the boat away from the iceberg they were about to collide with, but not quick enough to prevent the aft end from being crushed between it and another floe. They leapt from the sinking canoe to safety, the blonde managing to grab the box of fish and bring it with him. The trio watched in dismay as the wooden prow disappeared under the ice-cold water, never to be seen again. Turning on the two benders with a frown, Sokka used his spear to point at the spot the boat sunk. Now look what you did. Katara scowled and bent a whip at her brother's head. Wisely realizing the danger, he ducked and the whip missed, traveling through the water and impacting into an iceberg across from them. With a great crack, the berg split in two and splashed into the sea, causing a large wave to shake the floe they stood on. After the water settled and the trio had regained their footing, they beheld something unnatural. A small iceberg, comparatively, popped out of the water. It was mostly round and seemed hollow, the inside glowing and casting blue light. Sun swallowed nervously, his skin tingling. Spirits, he murmured quietly, eyes wide. Katara skated over the water to examine the strange iceberg while Sun jumped over and joined her, leaving Sokka behind. Oh sure, just leave me behind, why don't ya? He grumbled, hopping over to them on a few floating patches of ice. I think there's someone inside of there, his sister said quietly, peering through the thick sheet of ice. Inside of the hollow iceberg, the form of someone could be seen sitting down in a meditative position, though their features were shadowed by the light. The figure opened its eyes, causing Katara to gasp. She pulled the club off of Sokka's back and started slamming it against the iceberg. They're alive in there, she cried as the club hit the ice once more. The hollow cracked and burst, a spear of light piercing through the clouds and into the sky as a wave of wind washed over the trio, nearly tossing them into water after blinding them. As the pillar of light faded, they uncovered their eyes to see the figure standing on the ice above them, looking down on them with glowing eyes. The glow quickly faded, and the person flopped to the ground bonelessly, sliding down the short incline to rest at their feet. Katara, ever the mothering sort, was by the boy's side nearly instantly, gently patting his face. The boy was obviously young, just on the cusp of being a teenager. But what stood out about him most was the blue arrow tattoo that ended on his forehead and drew back over the top of his bald head and disappeared into the collar of his orange and yellow robes. Drawing back with a muted gasp of shock, Sun couldn't help but stare at the boy slowly regaining consciousness. The Avatar, he whispered, though neither of the two tribals heard him. Groaning lightly, the boy slowly opened his eyes. I need to ask you something. Katara cautiously asked, what? Come closer. She leaned in with a concerned look on her face. Will you go penguin sledding with me? He asked in a normal, boisterous voice. Katara blinked in surprise and leaned back at the sudden volume. Sure, I guess. The Avatar casually bent the air around him and floated to his feet, looking around him and scratching the back of his head, ignoring Sokka leaping back in alarm. What's going on here? You tell us. Sokka replied, pointing the sharp end of his spear at the boy. How'd you get in the ice? And why aren't you frozen? The young boy batted the spear away from, opening his mouth to reply, when a deep, low groan came from within the hollowed-out shell of the iceberg. Appa! He cried, jumping over the lip of ice crater. Are you alright? Wake up, buddy. Sokka and Katara climbed up the lip, leaving a still gaping Sun standing alone. He blinked blankly and slowly followed them, his eyes going even wider when they fell on a six-legged, thickly furred creature with a pair of horns on its head, and in between those two was an arrow of discolored fur. Along with the arrow, what also stood out about the large animal was its very large, flat tail. What is that thing? Sokka asked, examining the animal suspiciously. That's Appa, my flying bison. The boy replied cheerfully. The Water Tribe warrior rolled his eyes and jacked a thumb at his sister. Right, and this is Katara, my flying sister. Sun, still stunned, watched their interactions with a blank look. Even Appa sneezing on Sokka garnered no response. The paranoid one is Sokka, my brother, and the silent one is Sun, our friend. Katara introduced politely, after her brother accused the innocent-looking boy of being a Fire Nation spy. You never told us your name. The boy went to answer, but was interrupted by a loud, explosive sneeze that sent him sailing into the air. He landed easily and slid down in front of them with a smile. I'm Aang. You just sneezed, and flew 10 feet in the air. Sokka commented dryly, shooting a look at Sun. The blonde was the only other person he'd ever seen go that far. You're an airbender, Katara declared, pointing at Aang with a shocked look. Not just an airbender, Sun spoke up for the first time. He's the Avatar. Aang looked panicked, his gray eyes going wide. And no, I'm not. He tried to deny. Airbender, animal familiar, it's possible the ice did freeze him, Sokka muttered thoughtfully. And do you feel it? He asked Sun. The blonde man nodded seriously. I do. Aang is definitely the Avatar. The young Avatar sighed in dismay, hanging his head. Yeah, I am. How did you know, though? Sun shook his head. That's not something I can answer right now, he replied, uncharacteristically serious. However, we do need to get back home. Nightfall isn't far off, and it's never smart to out in the tundra during the night. Aang perked back up, smiling. Well, if you guys need a lift, Appa and I can take you. He jumped onto Appa's head and took up the reins attached to the bison's horns. Katara thanked him and climbed into the saddle on Appa while Sokka crossed his arms. No way am I getting on that fluffy snot monster. He denied, turning away. His sister gave him an unimpressed look as Sun climbed up next to her. What? Are you going to wait for some other monster to give you a ride? You know, before you freeze to death. Her brother sighed in defeat and climbed on, and Aang grasped the reins. Alright, first-time flyers, hold on tight. He flicked the reins and shouted, yip yip. Appa raised his tail and slammed it onto the ice, launching them into the air, before they splashed back down into the water. Wow! Sokka muttered sarcastically. That was truly amazing. Aang patted his horned friend's head comfortingly as he lowed. He's just tired. Don't worry, buddy, take your time. Sun sat in the saddle comfortably, watching Aang with a very serious gleam in his eyes, muttering to himself under his breath. At the rate we're going, we won't make it back home until tomorrow, he spoke up suddenly. It would be a good idea to get to sleep soon. Having said his piece, the normally cheerful blonde man drew his cape around him like a blanket and laid down, falling asleep within seconds. Katara and Sokka exchanged shrugs, and her brother stuck a piece of blubbered seal jerky in his mouth before kicking back. His sister, on the other hand, spent the next few hours switching between shooting worried looks Sun's way and shooting questioning looks Aang's way. However, in another world, Sun was having an important conversation. He opened his eyes, finding himself standing on top of a mountain. Similar rocky, nearly barren mountains spread as far as the eye could see, each peak rising far above the clouds, the light of a nearly setting sun glinting off of the rocks. Sun suddenly crouched and rolled back, avoiding a projectile that would have hit his face in the process and catching another, hurling it back at the source. An orange blur flipped over the object, landing in the branches of a tree. MHMH, staying on your toes, I see, my student. The spirit slipped from the tree, hanging by the branch by its long orange tail. With his hairy arms and legs and long, prehensile tail, he looked very much like a monkey. A monkey with a human face, wearing loose blue clothes and a mischievous smile. Sun sighed and gave his master a fond, if exasperated, look. Master, we need to talk, not throw pies at each other, which I would win if you didn't cheat with your tail, you old monkey. The monkey man giggled excitedly. If you aren't cheating, you aren't trying. Yes, I know, you old bastard. He muttered, before coughing into his fist. Anyway, when you said I was to be the Avatar's spiritual guide, I didn't expect him to be a kid. And I certainly didn't expect him to be running away from his destiny. The monkey man frowned, playfully wagging his finger. I gave you part of my name, the least you could do is use the rest of it. You'll break your poor old master's heart. Sun sighed and rolled his eyes. Fine, Master Wu, my questions still stand. Why didn't you tell me more? Master Wu grimaced, flipping from his perch and alighting on the ground. Spirits have rules, as you know, one of which is non-interference. And not interfering includes telling one's challenges they will face in life. After all, that's what makes life a challenge, no? Wu giggled again and Sun nodded reluctantly. That is true, but what about the Avatar? If he runs from his destiny much longer, there won't be 4 nations to balance. One most often meets his destiny on the road he takes to avoid it, his master replied wisely, leaning on the tree, snacking on a peach. Sun narrowed his eyes on the monkey spirit. You must have stolen that from some far wiser spirit, he declared dryly. There's no way you could actually be that wise. Wu flipped over him, hanging precariously over the edge of the mountain. You would be surprised at the depths one passes when their surface seems so shallow, my student. And that is also why the spirits linked your destiny to the avatars. When we first became aware of you, most of them wanted you dead. He explained, losing his amusement. You had no destiny, no fate, you changed the fate of others just by existing, and even now, your future is still cloudy, despite their efforts. But, you took me under your wing, and trained me. Sun recounted with a small, genuine smile. A student who would use your teachings to change the world. And play the greatest prank of them all, on everyone, humans and spirits alike. Wu smiled widely, showing surprisingly sharp teeth. The fate they hold so sovereign, the destiny they see as inexorable, changed beyond their wildest dreams, by one they would have ended, all because they were afraid. Afraid of the unknown. But I don't fear the unknown, I love it. So many new things to discover, so many new things to learn, so many new people to trick and make themselves look like fools. Wu giggled happily, doing a short back flip that ended with him reclining on the rocks as if they were cushions. But that is the farthest even my interference can go before the big ones decided to attack me. He admitted with a shrug. I have given you the tools and the training to succeed, and it's now up to you to do so. All I can offer is my occasional guidance, to point you in the right direction, well, maybe not the right direction, at first anyway. I have to amuse myself somehow. Rolling his eyes, Sun turned away and watched the setting sun as it disappeared beyond the horizon. Evil old monkey, he grumbled, kicking a pebble off the mountain. I can see your meaning, Master Wu. Thank you for telling me. You are my only student, young Sun. He replied with a nod. I may not be able to tell you everything, but what I can, I won't hide. But for now, I believe it is time for you to sleep. His tail rose from behind a rock, a cream pie balanced delicately on the tip. Sun turned to his master to say goodbye and was met with a face full of cream. The sudden impact made him stumble and fall from the mountain, his muffled shout ringing through the air. Wu giggled as the stars blinked into the sky. Not the pie again. Sun muttered in his sleep, causing Katara to give him a strange look. The next morning, the group arrived at the Southern Water Tribe and introduced Aang to them. Aang, this is Entire Water Tribe. Entire Water Tribe, this is Aang. Katara introduced. The tribe drew back a little as he waved, and he asked the young woman next to him why that was. No one's seen an airbender, not since they went extinct, or so we thought. Gran explained, her eyes shifting to a stretching sun. Extinct, Aang said loudly. Katara quickly grabbed the young airbender by the arm and gestured to the old woman. Aang, this is my grandmother. Call me Gran, she replied simply. Sokka, having watched the conversation from in front of their tent, decided to ask a question that had been on his mind, Sokka style. What is this, a weapon? He asked, snatching the staff Aang carried with him, examining it with a critical eye. You can't even stab anything with it. Aang bent a current of air, pulling the staff back into his hands. It's not for stabbing, it's for airbending. He replied, spinning his staff and causing two wing-like cloth pieces to pop out, with two smaller ones on the bottom. It lets me bend air currents around me and fly. Last time I checked, humans can't fly. Sokka retorted dryly. Sun arched an eyebrow at him. That was jumping, not flying. I'll show you, the Avatar said with a smile, crouching and leaping into the air. He held onto his glider and flew through the air with ease, looping and flipping through the air to the awe of the Water Tribe. Can you do that? Sokka whispered to Sun, who nodded and pulled on the knee-length white cape hanging on his back. What? Do you think I wear a cape because they're awesome? He asked rhetorically, sticking his arms through small cloth hoops in fabric and stretching it out. Sun knelt and jumped, sailing into the air to join Aang in the sky. Compared to the young airbender, Sun's flying was somewhat rougher, but that was to be expected. Only one of them had actually been trained to do so. The two of them looped and twirled around each other, putting on a show for the watching tribals. Showing off, the blonde flipped onto his back and put his hands behind his head. Aang answered by closing his eyes and flying sideways, the grin on both of their faces showing how much they were enjoying flying. Sun rolled around just in time to see the watchtower made of snow looming in front of him. Quickly, he flipped and landed on the tower, gently pushing off of the snow and landing on the ground safely. The other airbender was not so lucky, and plowed into the tower of snow head first, knocking it over, to Sokka's dismay. Still smiling, Sun heaved Aang out of the snow and onto his feet as the Water Tribe warrior desperately tried to prop his tower back up, only for it to collapse on top of him. You're an airbender? Aang asked with surprise and delight. The blonde nodded, before sticking out his hand and wobbling it. I'll tell you more later. Katara ran up to join them with wide, glittering eyes. That was amazing. I didn't know you could fly. She exclaimed in amazement. Sokka pulled himself out from under his collapsed tower and stalked off, grumbling. Later that day, Sun stood in the center of a ring, surrounded by pillars of ice he had just formed, breathing deeply. He retrieved a silver coin from one of his pouches and placed it on his thumb, flicking it into the air. As soon as the spinning silver disc left his hand, he burst into action, acrobatically spinning and swinging, bending water from the snow and lashing out at the pillars around him. Moving as fast as he could, Sun attacked the pillars with whips and slashes, grunting with effort. As he whipped his hand down, slicing the last pillar in half, the coin fell in front of his face and landed on the ground with a soft ping. Damn it, he sighed, wiping the seat from his brow, kneeling to pick up the coin. I'm still not as fast as I'd like to be. He bent more pillars up from the snow and breathed deep, before flicking the coin into the air and attacking again. As his whip lashed out and smashed a pillar, a sudden flare of light from off in the distance startled him, causing Sun to lose his footing and tumble to the ground. He narrowed his eyes as the flare arced in the sky. Why is there a Fire Nation flare in sky above the South Pole? He asked himself. That can't be good. The coin bounced off of his head and landed in the snow with a sad plink. Snatching the coin up and pocketing it, Sun leapt off, back towards the water tribe. When he arrived, a palpable aura of sadness permeated the village, causing Sun to frown thoughtfully. He spied Katara marching angrily away from the village, stopping and kneeling some distance away with her face in her hands. Pushing off, he landed next to her quietly and sat down. "What's wrong, Katara? Did something happen?" She quickly wiped her angry tears away and faced the blonde man. "Yes." Sokka banished Aang. Sun's face fell slack. "What? Why?" She looked away, ashamed. We went penguin sledding, and ended up near the Fire Nation ship that's been there for years, and is forbidden to go to. You went exploring the ship and ended up setting off a booby trap." He finished, looking unsurprised. "You know?" Katara asked in surprise. "Yeah." He nodded. "It's Fire Nation policy to trap every ship they lose. And I saw the flare. Kinda hard not to." She nodded unhappily and continued her story. "After we came back, Sokka banished him." Sun narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. "Why do you sound so upset about this? I mean, you've known Aang for nearly a day." "Well," she rubbed the back of her head sheepishly. "He offered to take me to North Pole, so that I could learn from a master." Realizing who she was talking, Katara waved her hands. "Not that I don't like learning from you, it's just my style of bending doesn't work for you." He finished with a nod. "I know, Katara. I have been to the North Pole and have learned at the feet of a master, and I sucked at it. You, on the other hand, would only benefit from the rigidity of a schedule like that." Katara slumped as he put an arm around her shoulders. "Well, I'll never find out now. Aang is gone and so are my chances." Sun frowned, shaking her slightly. "What am I, chopped seal liver? You know I came here on a boat, right? It's more than big enough for 2 people. And with our waterbending, we would make good time." She blinked in surprise, her eyes watering. "You would do that for me?" "Of course I would. You're my friend, right?" At her happy nod, Sun smiled and gave her a one-armed hug. "There are always more options than what appear at first, Katara. If you want to, we can be gone within the hour." Katara sighed and shook her head, turning and giving the blonde a full hug. "I can't do that, even though I want to. I don't want to leave Gran and Sokka with what I said. I don't think I could take that." Sun patted her back and put his hands on her shoulders. "Let's go talk to them, maybe we can change their minds if we work together." "I doubt that, but I would like to try." She stood up and dusted herself off, sniffing. Sun stood with her, offering his arm. Katara smiled and took it, and they walked back to the tribe together. "Thanks for listening, Sun. You're a good friend." He winked playfully at her. "I couldn't just let you be all alone and sad, Katara, you're much too pretty." She playfully shoved him away and laughed with him, though it petered out when they became aware of the grayish-black snow falling from the sky. "Oh no," Katara whispered worriedly. "The Fire Nation. Get on my back," Sun ordered, kneeling in front of her. "I'm faster." Wordlessly, she hopped onto his back and held on as he sprinted towards the tribe at great speeds. He slid to a stop just inside the walled area as it began to shake, Katara hopping off to go help hide some of the kids. Sokka stood on his crumbling wall as the black prow of a Fire Nation vessel rose above him. "Sokka, get out of the way!" his sister cried. As the prow of the ship met the wall crumbled into a pile, taking Sokka with it. They all stared up at the length of black metal in fear and trepidation as it steamed ominously. With a hellish screech of metal on metal, the prow of the ship tilted and fell onto the snow, forming a ramp for a company of armored firebenders to descend from. Their leader, who seemed to have a scar on the right side of his face, though it was hard to tell from the helmet, stepped down the ramp with a haughty spring in his step. Sokka, having gathered his courage, charged at the leader with his war club held high over his head. The leader calmly and expertly kicked the weapon out of his hands, and in the same motion, kicked Sokka in the face and into a pile of snow. The Water Tribe drew back in fear at the ease shown by the Fire Nation in defeating their only warrior. Sun, crouched behind the crowd of tribals, watching the events transpiring through their legs, narrowed his eyes as the leader approached Katara and Gran. "Where are you hiding him?" he barked angrily, making them draw back. "Zuko," the blond man muttered, drawing up the hood on his clothing and securing the scarf around his nose and mouth to hide his features. Zuko grabbed the elder woman roughly by the arm and dragged her in front of the gathered tribals. He'd be about this age. Master of all elements. Sun tilted his head curiously. Why is Zuko looking for the Avatar? He asked himself, rolling up his sleeves to reveal thick, carved wrist guards that extend up to his elbows and gleamed white and gold. Having received no response except stunned, fearful silence, Zuko threw Gran back at Katara and released a blast of fire over their heads, making a noise of frustration. "I know you're hiding him. Where is he?" Sokka managed to pull himself from the snow he was stuck in and retrieved his weapon, charging again at Zuko's back. The Fire Nation prince made a face of annoyance and turned to face the charge, dodging the first swing before grabbing the Water Tribe and flipping him over his head, stripping the club away. He turned and shot a blast of fire at Sokka, who nimbly dodged the attack and whipped the boomerang off of his back and hurled it at Zuko's head. Zuko barely dodged the metal weapon, his face twisting in anger. One of the kids had grabbed a spear from nearby and tossed it to Sokka, who grabbed it out of the air and charged at the Fire Nation soldiers again. Sun gave a deadpan look as Zuko easily disarmed the Water Tribe warrior, breaking his spear into pieces with his wrist guards, before pulling the remainder away and harshly poking Sokka in the forehead with it before snapping it in half and tossing the pieces to the ground. Note to self, Sokka's strengths do not include open combat. He said to himself. He stood and parted the crowd as Sokka's boomerang came back around and impacted off of Zuko's helmet, enraging the firebender, who launched a blast the warrior, having finally tired of dealing with. Sun pushed through the tribals and jumped in front of Sokka, the fire being deflected by his armed guards. His jump carried him over the distance and he lashed out, throwing Zuko onto his back 10 feet away. Sun landed and immediately dropped to his hands, spinning and kicking the feet out from under a firebender, rapidly coming back to his feet to snatch the falling enemy by the ankle and whip him into another, sending both sailing back. He spun, deflecting a blast fire away and jumped, landing with his legs around the firebender's neck before throwing himself back, flipping the soldier into air. He planted his hands and swung his feet out, tripping another soldier, using his momentum from the spin to launch himself at another, landing both of his feet on the firebender's chest, throwing him back. As Sun flipped and dodged the blasts heading his way, out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Aang standing before Zuko, who was attacking him with rapid punches and kicks. The young airbender was hard-pressed to defend himself, his face showing obvious fear. Sun caught the arm of Firebender and twisted, throwing him into another. As he fought, Katara was hard-pressed to take her eyes off of him, even when the heat of Zuko's flames flared near her face. He was agile, so fast, spinning and flipping, his punches and kicks throwing grown men around like dolls and causing obvious pain when they landed. It was at that point that Katara remembered the stories the young blonde man would tell around the campfire, of attacking and defeating bandits and mercenaries and winning, and that was when she realized he hadn't been exaggerating his skills at all. If anything, the way he could pick up full-grown men, in heavy metal armor no less, and toss them around as if they were snowballs, he had downplayed his strength. Sun flipped away from a sweeping leg of fire, jumping into one of his stances, left foot planted, right foot near his knee, right arm crooked over his head and left arm bent upwards from his waist, ready to attack. "Stop!" Aang yelled pleadingly, "I'll surrender." Sun, still in his stance, glanced at the young airbender incredulously. "Aang, we're winning," he pointed out, nodding towards the limping and injured firebenders. "We can beat them." Ignoring him, Aang pleaded with Zuko. "If I go with you, will you leave them alone?" Zuko glanced at Sun, still in his stance, before glancing at Aang and nodding once, stiffly. The Avatar handed the scarred prince his glider and held his hands out to be restrained. He was quickly tied up, led away, shooting the tribals a comforting look. Sun, still in his stance, gaped at the leaving ship in disbelief. What the hell? He shouted. I had them on the ropes, you idiot. Self-sacrifice is worthless if you're capable of winning. Sokka nudged the fuming blonde bender, who he noted that, despite the stance being a short transitional type, Sun hadn't wobbled once despite the off-balance nature of it. Let it go, Sun. He made his choice. Sun stomped the ground, cracking the ice even further, to the pair's shock. That ice was several feet thick, and the fact that the Fire Nation ship had been steaming full power was the only reason it pierced through it. Yeah, but it was a stupid choice. He growled, pulling his hood and scarf away from his face. He turned on his heel and headed to his tent. How am I supposed to protect and guide the Avatar when does something like this? I can see why the spirits charged me with this task. He ducked into his tent and started stuffing his things into his pack. Wait, you're supposed to guide the Avatar? Katara asked in shock. Sun sighed and sat back on his legs. Yes. For the most part, I grew up in the spirit world. They gave me the task of guiding and protecting the Avatar in his duty of bringing balance to the world. The siblings traded shocked looks as he tied the strings on his pack. So, you're going to rescue Aang? The waterbender asked cautiously. Sun shot her a dry look. Well, duh, I can't very well protect him if he gets killed by the Fire Lord, can I? Katara glanced at her brother before leaving the tent, followed shortly by Sokka. Shaking his head, Sun threw on his pack and marched out of the Water Tribe. He put his fingers to his lips and whistled sharply. After waiting a few moments, the ground rumbled slightly as the large form of Appa lumbered up to the blonde bender, who patted him on the head. Hey there, big guy. He greeted softly. We're going to go rescue your foolish partner. Are you rested up and ready to fly? Appa growled lowly, and he took that as a yes. Sun secured his pack to the saddle and climbed up onto Appa's head, taking the reins firmly in his hands. As he directed the sky bison away from the Southern Water Tribe, two voices called out to him. Turning, he was surprised to see Sokka and Katara running at them, calling for him to wait. I'm sorry I have to leave so soon, but we're coming with you, Katara declared firmly, climbing into the saddle with her brother. We have permission, and we're ready. Sun arched an eyebrow at them, before giving a genuine smile. Thanks, guys. Are you ready? I was not born ready, but I totally am. Sokka exclaimed, securing his stuff. Well, alright, Sun said determinedly. Let's go save us an Avatar. Appa. Yip yip. Sokka had eventually stopped screaming a few minutes after Appa had taken flight. The intent behind their flight didn't stop Katara and Sun from whooping in delight as the sky bison rode the air currents smoothly and effortlessly. Once he was sure that Appa was heading in the right direction, and with the trail of smoke the Fire Nation ship was leaving behind, it wasn't hard to track. He slipped into the saddle with the others and pulled off his scarf and hooded cape, and started tugging off the heavy overclothes he wore to deal with the cold. A heavy shirt and pants was tucked away, revealing to the Water Tribe siblings that Sun wore armor underneath them, some of which they had seen during his fight with the Firebenders. Sun wore mostly white, a white, long-sleeved shirt under a gray vest, with thick metal wrist guards that looked both heavy and ornamental, being decorated with gold carvings over the white metal, and what seemed to be bandages on his hands, along with similar small pieces on his shoulders. He wore a gray sash with multiple pouches around his waist that held up white pants, over which were leg guards that looked equally thick and heavy, somewhat more so due to the thick iron rings that held the armor in place around his ankles and below the knees, and it ended in three claw-like parts just in front of the toes, with his feet being bare except for bandages that wrapped around his ankle and the bottom of his foot. After pulling his cape back on and wrapped his scarf around his neck, Sun looked up to find questioning and incredulous looks directed at him via the Water Tribe siblings. What? He asked blankly. Okay. 1. Have you been wearing those this whole time? And 2. How did we not notice? Sokka questioned confusedly. Sun shrugged, tapping the metal. Do these look easy to take off? I've worn them for so long that I barely notice the weight anymore. Plus, they're a gift from my master. As for the second part, I was wearing other stuff over it. He replied easily. We're coming up on the Fire Nation ship. Sokka, I want you to hang back and attack at a distance, you're not the best at close range. Sokka scowled at the blonde man, but acquiesced reluctantly. And Katara, you've gotten pretty good at the whips and shields, right? He asked, getting a nod from the young waterbender. Right, so just remember to flow with the water and play defensively. Don't be afraid to dive into the water if it seems like too much, okay? Katara nodded with a determined look on her face. Right. Appa flew around the column of smoke rising from the Fire Nation ship and hovered above the bow, out of range of normal fire-bending attacks. Right. I'm going to drop in. Sun told them, withdrawing a small stick from a pocket. He stepped out of the saddle and fell through the air, and as he did, the stick in his hands extended into a 6-foot-long golden staff. He landed on the deck with a heavy clang of metal that definitely echoed through the ship. The firebenders on deck sounded the alarm and rushed at the hooded blonde, who immediately leapt into the fray and began wreaking havoc with his staff. He spun the golden weapon with speed and ferocity, his blows sending his enemies flying across the ship. Sun made sure to tackle them in small groups, and always up close. He smacked the staff into the stomach of a firebender and spun it up, launching the man into the air. Twirling to avoid a blast of fire that scorched the edge of his cape and swung the staff at the firebender's knee, bringing him down before flicking his weapon back and into the bender's helmeted head. He twisted and caught the falling firebender, spinning and hurling him through a doorway into the ship and into a group of approaching enemies to buy some more time, so he could dive into the ship and retrieve Aang. However, his plans were cancelled when the airbender sprinted up onto the deck with his staff in hand, looking rather casual despite the circumstances. Sun, he shouted in surprise. What are you doing here? Sun dodged a fire blast from behind and thrust his staff back into the firebender's stomach, then swung it over his shoulder into his head, spinning and kicking the dazed enemy away. We came to rescue you, dummy. You're free, so let's get out of here. Zuko charged from below deck, nearly snorting fire and went directly towards Aang, ignoring the hooded blonde, which was a mistake. Sun swung his staff into Zuko's stomach, spun away as Aang whipped his glider around and unleashed a blast that hurled the prince into a wall with a heavy clang. He fell to the ground with a pained groan and did not get back up. Appa landed on the deck, and the two airbenders turned to retreat, coming on the sight of several firebenders either frozen in place or lying awkwardly on the ground, with their feet frozen to deck while on their backs. Katara and Sokka actually worked pretty well together, when they could. She would freeze their feet to the deck and he would bounce his boomerang off of their heads. Seeing Appa land and Aang safe, they retreated and climbed onto the sky bison. Sun still had his feet on the deck when a scream of rage echoed over the water. Zuko, having regained consciousness, saw his prey escaping and charged at the one in white, 2 daggers of fire coming from the bottom of his clenched fists. Appa jumped into the air as the prince dashed across the deck at the blonde man. Sun, look out! Katara cried out. Sun calmly stood his staff on the deck and took a casual standing stance as Zuko closed the distance. As the Fire Nation prince came within 5 feet of him, Sun snatched something out his pouch and hurled it at Zuko's face. A cloud of something washed over Zuko's face, blinding him and getting in his mouth. He stepped back, scrubbing at his face angrily, and finally opened his eyes to look at what had been thrown at him. It sparkled pink in the sunlight. Is this glitter dust? He shouted angrily. Sun wound up and sucker punched Zuko in the face as the prince looked up at him incredulously, throwing him back down on the deck. He snatched his staff up and back flipped onto the saddle, calling back mockingly, "It matches your sparkling personality." An older man, older in years and rounder about the middle, ran up onto the deck as Zuko managed to recover. They nodded to one another and moved in tandem, launching a large blast of fire at Appa. Sun's eyebrows went up. Aang, that's all you. He said casually as the airbender jumped onto Appa's tail and swung his glider, the small wings out to give the swing more power as he bent a crescent wave of air at the fireball, deflecting it into a nearby iceberg. The blast shattered a good chunk of the ice, dropping it on top of the ship's prow. Ha! Sokka called. Looks like you got stopped cold. The Water Tribe warriors' mocking laughter drifted back as the sky bison disappeared in the distance. Zuko watched as his prize flew away, clenching his fist and growling to himself. He paused as he wiped the glitter from his face, his mind shooting back to a memory. Young Zuko strode through his home proudly, or as proudly as a 7-year-old can get, ready to end the day. However, his first step into his room caught on a thin wire stretched across the frame, causing him to sprawl onto the floor with a yelp of shock. His head landed on stick, and that stick, balanced on a stack of books, launched a bowl up into the air, and it fell on Zuko, covering him in pink glitter. Coughing frantically trying to wipe the pink dust off of himself, he said, "Is this glitter dust?" He was answered by a pair of giggles. Zuko strode angrily around his door and found a young boy with a shock of bright blonde hair and marks similar to whiskers on his cheeks rolling on the floor, while a girl slightly younger than him with ebony hair and amber eyes vainly tried to muffle her giggles behind her sleeve and failing badly. Azula. Naruto. The two kids ran away from the glittering, angry Zuko as he chased them through the house. It matches your sparkling personality, Zuzu. The young blonde called, high-fiving Azula. Naruto. Zuko murmured in shock, eyes wide and glazed. What was that, my prince? The older man asked. Zuko pointed at the sky where the sky bison had disappeared. Uncle, that man in white, that was Naruto. Uncle arched an eyebrow in question, frowning slightly. How can you be so sure? Zuko pulled on his shirt, scattering glitter on the deck. He threw glitter at my face and said it matched my personality. No one else has ever done that. He quieted down, tapping his chin in thought. I thought he was dead. Azula thought he was dead. I need to tell her this. Get me a messenger hawk. He ordered. Zuko turned and found most of the crew attempting to unfreeze their comrades and free the ship from the ice, and slapped a palm to his face. I'll go get one myself. He muttered, marching off into the ship. His sister, despite their less than stellar relationship, was still his sister, and he still cared about her, and she had been the one most broken up about her only boyfriend's supposed death than almost anyone else among their little group, except, perhaps, for Ty Lee. Oh man, that was awesome. Sokka cheered, pumping his fist triumphantly. I can't believe we took on the Fire Nation and actually beat them. Good job, Katara. His sister smiled happily until he changed tack a second later. But that was super dangerous and you're not doing it again. She reached out and smacked the back of his head. I am, Sokka, and you aren't going to change my mind. Sun interjected before the brother could voice his complaints. I saw what you guys did, he said with a smile. You guys work really well together, when you aren't bickering. Katara smiled along with her brother at the compliment. Aang joined them in the saddle, sitting with them. Thank you for coming to rescue me, guys. He said gratefully. Sun nudged him with his elbow. That wouldn't have been necessary if you hadn't surrendered, you know. He remarked dryly. Aang rubbed the back of his bald head sheepishly. I know, but all the fire they were throwing around could have hurt the people around us. I just didn't want anyone to get hurt because of me. He muttered, slumping a little. Sun put a hand on his shoulder, smiling comfortingly. I know, Aang, and I can understand where you're coming from. You just need some guidance, and that's what I'm here for. You're here to guide me? The Avatar asked. How? Sun frowned and shook his head. Hold on, I need to do my introduction. He patted the saddle. Hey Appa, can you land us on the berg over there? Thanks, buddy. Appa roared in acknowledgement and brought them into land, and the blonde man jumped off and back away. Alright, here we go. He muttered, reaching into his pocket. Sun whipped out his staff as it grew to full size, spinning it around him in a golden blur, before slamming it on the ground, cracking the ice. My name is Son Naruto, Avatar Aang, and I have been charged by the spirits to guide you. He pointed one end of the staff at a wide-eyed Aang, in your journey to master the elements and bring balance to this world. I am your guide, I am your guard, and I will protect your life with my own, in this world and the next. This I have been charged with, and this I will not fail in. As he spoke, the clouds opened up, a shaft of sunlight shone down on him, making his staff, armor and hair all glow with a nearly ethereal golden light. As soon as his introduction was over, the sunlight faded and the serious atmosphere fled as he smiled at the stunned trio. How was that? I've been practicing that for years. Was it impressive? He asked eagerly. They all nodded slowly, causing Sun to pump a fist and cheer. Awesome. Are you really my guide? Aang asked, once he got over his shock. The blonde man nodded seriously. I am, Aang. As I said, I will guide you and guard you with my life. It's my destiny. They piled back into the saddle and took to the air again. How did you do that thing with your staff? And what was with the sunlight? Sokka asked quickly, examining the weapon lying on Sun's legs. It was 6 feet long and colored a dark, burnished gold, each end decorated with carvings of monkeys. This used to be my master's weapon, he explained, patting the weapon fondly. He imbued it with the ability to change shape and size and will, and since it's from the spirit world, the laws of this world don't apply to it, so I can do the same. You keep mentioning your master, Katara commented as the staff shrunk in size and was stored away. Who is it? Sun smiled widely and pointed up at the sky, more particularly, the sun. He gave me part of his name, and I've known him as Master Wu. But to other people, he's called the Monkey King, the Sun Spirit. Which should also answer your second question, Sokka. Aang appeared in the saddle in a blur of motion. You were trained by a spirit. He yelled excitedly. How? I lived in the Fire Nation until I was about 8, I think. I had to leave, and I somehow ended up in the spirit world. He explained with a shrug. No one except the Avatar is supposed to be able to do that, or bend more than one element, so they didn't know what to do with me. Most of them wanted to kill me, actually, but Master Wu intervened with the idea that, instead of erasing me from existence, they tie my destiny with the Avatars, to be your guide and guard. They eventually agreed, and Master Wu took me under his wing and trained me. Wow, the young Avatar said quietly. So you guys are coming with me? He directed at Katara and Sokka, who both nodded determinedly. Of course we are. You promised to help me find a waterbending master, remember? Katara asked playfully, smiling. Yeah, we'll find one and train together. Aang replied happily. Sokka jacked a thumb at his sister and pointed at Sun. I'm just here to protect my sister and my friend, even though he plays pranks on me. He glowered at the blonde, who smiled cheekily at him. I'm here to help you however I can, Aang, in mastering water, earth and fire. Sun stated seriously, with a small smirk playing about his lips. Thanks, guys, Aang murmured, scrubbing at his watering eyes. We'll find the masters, and we'll stop the Fire Nation, together. He declared firmly, as the others nodded with him. But first, he whipped out a map and pointed at several locations. We have serious business to do here, here, and here. What's there to do? Katara asked, peering at the map. Here, we'll ride the hopping llamas. Then way over here, we'll surf on the backs of giant koi fish. Then over here, we'll ride the backs of hog monkeys. They don't like being ridden, but that's what makes it fun. He said excitedly. Sokka and Katara traded skeptical, but not unexcited looks, and Sun slapped a hand over his face. I'm going to have to be the mature, responsible one, aren't I? He muttered dejectedly. Looking up at the sun, he saw the beams of light form into a familiar face, pointing and laughing at him. Sun gave the sun a rude gesture and grumbled to himself, to the amusement of the others, who started laughing at him. He smiled and joined in, their laughter ringing through the air as Appa sailed through the sky. The next morning dawned early for Katara, who was usually the first one awake among her tribe despite her age. She opened her eyes and frowned, wondering why her bed furs felt more restrictive than usual. Then the events of the past days came to the forefront of her mind, and she smiled to herself. Finding Aang in the iceberg, getting attacked by the Fire Nation, joining Sun with her brother to rescue Aang and attack the Fire Nation back, and going off on a journey to help the Avatar master the elements, and find a master for herself. Katara sighed to herself, smiling into her furs. Quietly, she slipped a hand under her pillow and retrieved something she'd slept with since she got it days ago. The flower made of ice that Sun had made for her, that despite being made of frozen water, hadn't melted or lost its shape at all and was still cool. She cradled it against her chest, remembering how she received it. A pretty snow flower for a pretty snow flower. Had he meant it? She wondered, touching the rigid petals. She didn't have much experience with boys beyond her brother, and definitely not in the way she was wondering. The cheerful blonde man had flirted with her more than once during their stay at the South Pole, and she wasn't sure if he was flirting with her seriously or playfully. Shaking her head, she stored the flower away and got up. Katara would wait and see how things developed between them before doing anything. Sitting up, she turned and paused, seeing Sun standing near the fire. On one hand, staying perfectly still. Sun, what are you doing? She asked tentatively. Trying to meditate while upside down. He answered shortly, his voice sounding strained. To help with my concentration. Katara thought for a second. Is it actually helping? Sun grunted, shaking slightly. Nope. The pounding in my ears is really distracting. He gave up and flopped to the ground with a thump, sighing as his face slowly regained the normal coloring. She busied herself by rolling up her sleeping bag and storing it away on Appa's saddle, before grabbing the remains of last night's dinner and starting to make breakfast out of it. Sun joined her eventually, and the two sat in companionable silence for a few minutes before Aang shot off of the ground and sailed 10 feet in the air, whooping excitedly. They traded amused and wary looks as the young airbender floated back to the ground with a wide smile. We're going to the Southern Air Temple today. He cheered, appearing behind the two older benders in a blur of speed, throwing his arms around their shoulders. I can't wait for you guys to see everything. Sun balked slightly. I don't think it'll be the way you remember it, Aang. A lot can change in 100 years. Like the betrayal and near extinction of a people. I know, but I want to see it for myself, he informed them, taking a bowl of food from Katara. Sokka continued to sleep, wrapped up in his sleeping bag as they ate breakfast and packed their camping gear away. Aang, having grown tired of waiting for the Water Tribe warrior to wake, decided to move things along. Come on, Sokka, wake up. Air Temple time. Sokka grunted sleepily and lazily opened an eye, slowly rolling it up to look at the excitable airbender. Sleep now, temple, later. Then he closed his eyes and started snoring. Aang blinked in surprise, frowning a little. A mischievous grin spread across his lips as he picked up a stick and started poking the sleeping bag with it. Oh no, look out, Sokka, a prickle snake is in your sleeping bag. He called out with fake worry. Snapping awake, the boomerang-wielding warrior panicked and hopped around the broken-down campsite in his sleeping bag, screeching and yelling before he tripped and sprawled on the ground, realizing he'd been had by the irritated expression on his face. Sun and Katara laughed at the sight as Aang poked Sokka in the back of the head with his stick. Great, you're awake. Now we can finally go. He exclaimed happily, leaping onto Appa's head. He grumbled in annoyance and rolled his bag up slowly. Hey Sokka, hurry up or you won't get any breakfast. Sun called from the saddle, watching in amusement as the younger man hurriedly packed his things and scrambled in the saddle with a hungry gleam in his eyes. Aang took them up into the air as Sokka chowed down on a bowl of food, while Katara bent a small orb of water into different shaped and turned them to ice and back, and Sun created a spinning orb of wind that he passed from hand to hand and finger to finger. After about an hour of flying, the airbender announced, the Botala mountain range. We're getting really close. The young waterbender shuffled around the saddle to talk to Aang without the wind carrying away her words. Before we get there, we should talk about the airbenders. She started slowly. He turned around on Appa's head to peer at her with a questioning face. What about him? Worriedly, she glanced at Sun, who shared an uneasy look with her. Well, you should be prepared for what you find there. The Fire Nation is ruthless. They killed my mother and they might have done the same to your people. She replied, trying to be gentle. Aang shrugged, looking optimistic. Just because no one has seen any airbenders for a long time doesn't mean the Fire Nation got to them. I bet they escaped, he stated easily. Katara gulped, licking her lips nervously. Aang, I know it's hard to accept. You don't understand, Katara. He cut across, not unkindly. The only way to get to an airbender temple is by flying, and I really doubt the Fire Nation has any sky bison. Sun sighed heavily and beckoned the younger waterbender over, leaning in to whisper in her ear. I think this is something he has to see for himself, he said quietly, mood somber. I don't like this, but he won't accept it without proof. But that proof is the dead bodies of his people. She whispered back anxiously. It could really damage him. Katara rubbed her arms, looking worried. The blonde man put his arm around her and gave her a comforting squeeze. He's the Avatar, Katara. He was never destined for an easy life, but we are here for him, to help him deal with things like that. I doubt it'll ever be easy, though. He murmured sadly. They fell silent as they flew through the air, gripping each other when Aang sharply steered them around a mountain. As they passed the rocky face, a new view was presented to them, of the top of another mountain, this one with blue and white towers with rods on the roofs that jutted into the sky like spears. The central building was much taller and wider than the others and was placed between two rock spires. Looking over the mountain, Sun spotted several trails and paths that could lead straight to the top if taken by a relatively experienced climber with the right equipment. Aang really is in denial. He thought sadly. There it is. The Southern Air Temple, Aang announced grandly, a wide smile on his face. Wow, Aang, it's amazing. Katara said in an odd voice. Yeah, it looks really good, despite not being cared for in a long time. Sun agreed, scanning the mountain top for any signs of life. And not finding any. I know, the young airbender said, turning to look back in the saddle, frowning. Why are you guys sitting so close together? Both of the older benders hadn't moved after their whispered conversation, and thus Sun still had his arm around Katara, who was snuggled into his side. Coughing lightly and casually removing his arm, the blonde bender replied, You took that last mountain kinda sharp, buddy, we nearly tumbled out of the saddle. Warn us next time, please. Katara, inwardly missing the warmth provided by the blonde, nodded in agreement. I know you're excited, but not all of us are as experienced in riding a sky bison like you, Aang. Smiling ruefully, Aang rubbed the back of his bald head sheepishly. Sorry guys. Alright, we're coming in to land. He brought Appa down on a worn stone landing pad and the group dismounted, looking up at the winding rocky path that was covered with a layer of snow in trepidation. Well, except for Aang, who raced ahead of them, whooping. Man, where does a guy get something to eat around here? Sokka complained, rubbing his stomach. It's the middle of winter on top of a wind-swept mountain, Sokka. Sun retorted dryly, where do you think you can get food? The Water Tribe warrior paused in thought before speaking up. In the ground. The blonde shrugged. Maybe. Katara crossed her arms as they climbed the path. You're lucky enough to be one of the first outsiders to set foot on this mountain in 100 years, and all you can think about is food. She asked with annoyance. Sokka shrugged simply. Everybody has needs, sister of mine, and one of those is food. You had breakfast, Sun pointed out as they got closer to Aang, who had stopped to look down at something. Yeah, but that was just one bowl. The young airbender pointed down at a parapet cut into the face of the mountain, which had a small, densely packed field of sticks of varying heights, with 2 goal on either side of it. That's where my friends and I used to play airball. His finger swings over to an empty, dilapidated pen with troughs nearby. And that, the bison would sleep over there. His voice trailed off into the empty air, and he sighed lightly. What's wrong? Katara asked, though she had an idea. This place used to be full of monks and lemurs and bison, but now, it's empty and covered in weeds. Aang slumped sadly, and the older ones of the group traded looks. What's this airball game you mentioned? Sun asked quickly, changing the subject. Aang smiled and perked up. Come on, I'll show you. He jumped down to the field and quickly found a ball while the others climbed down. He began to explain the rules excitedly, making Sun blank out. By the time he came back, Sokka was standing unsteadily on some of the sticks in front of one of the goals, while Aang stood easily in front of his, spinning a ball around his body with his bending. Sun took that time to watch how Sokka reacted to the game. His footing was becoming more sure with every second, and despite the speed with which the ball bounced through the sticks, his focused blue eyes never lost track of it. His reaction time was not the best, however, and neither was his strength, though the ball was being bent at him very quickly. After seeing Sokka get plowed into the snow by the ball, again, the blonde decided to intervene. Alright, my turn. Let an actual airbender try it out, would ya? He jumped up in front of the goal and took a pose. Oh, right. This should be awesome, Aang said happily, retrieving the ball. He spun it around him and bent it into the field, sending it bouncing through the sticks at Sun. The blonde did his best to keep it in sight, and as it rocketed towards him, he bent a crescent wave of air in front of him. The ball deflected off of the air and bounced back into the sticks, heading towards Aang, who was smiling widely. He flipped over the ball and redirected the current around it, spinning and hurling it back at Sun. The blonde bender kept track of the ball and hopped from one platform to another, but the ball bounced off of smaller stick and hurtled through the goal. Alright, Aang cheered with his hands up. One for me. Sun smiled at the happiness in Aang's voice and retrieved the ball by bending a small cyclone between him and it. Best 3 out of 5. They played for a while longer, ending up tied at 2-2. The ball ricocheted around the field, and as it headed straight for the blonde's feet, Sun quickly back-flipped and bent the ball high up into air. As it came down, he crouched and flipped forward, heavily kicking the ball straight at Aang's chest. The younger airbender yelped and ducked, the ball just sailing over his head and through the goal, embedding deeply into the rock wall. Oops, Sun said sheepishly as the force of the impact dislodged some of the snow on the parapet. That was cool, Aang shouted excitedly, not caring that he had just lost. But I think that's enough playing. We have a whole temple to see. They hopped down from the field and started climbing back up the pathway, with Aang running ahead again. They caught up to him quickly, as he hadn't gone far before stopping in front of a statue of a monk, who seemed to radiate kindness and wisdom even through a stone copy. Guys, I'd like you to meet someone, Aang said happily, motioning towards the statue. Who's that? Katara asked carefully, examining the piece. The young airbender smiled slightly. Monk Gyatso, the greatest airbender in the world. He taught me everything I know. Clasping his hands, he respectfully bowed to the statue and stayed still for a few minutes, lost in thought. Katara approached Aang and laid a kind hand on his shoulder. You must miss him. Aang straightened up and looked past the statue, into the depths of the air temple. Yeah, he replied softly, walking around it. Where are you going now? Sokka asked, following behind the young airbender. As they moved into the temple proper, Sun hung back and looked up into the face of Monk Gyatso and bowed deeply, paying his respects to the long-dead man that taught Aang how to airbend. I swear to you, I will protect and guide your student to the best of my ability. He promised quietly, glancing up at the statue. Sun jerked back in shock as a blue haze that looked exactly like the old man gave him a kind smile and light bow. He blinked, and whatever he had seen was gone. Shaking his head, the blond man started to follow the others, and found them beyond a pair of heavy doors in large room that was covered in detailed statues arranged in a long spiral. They're lined up in a pattern, Katara reasoned, looking at the statues carefully. Air, water, earth and fire. The avatar cycle. Sun stated calmly. Right. These are the past avatars. She agreed, stepping back from one. All these people are your past lives, Aang. Sokka poked the statue of a burly earthbender with a serious face. You really believe that stuff, Katara? Past lives, avatar cycles and whatever. Sun nudged the younger man with his elbow. When the avatar dies, they're reincarnated into the next nation of the cycle, to master the elements and bring balance back to the world. Or in some lucky cases, maintain it. The two siblings shot questioning glances at each other. They had known Sun for a while, and while they knew he wasn't stupid, to hear him speak with measures of seriousness and respect was rather odd. Katara noticed that Aang had stopped in front of a statue that depicted a stately-looking firebender, and was staring up into its eyes with a glazed look. She took him by the shoulders and shook him gently. Aang, are you all right? Huh. Shaken out of his reverie, the young airbender glanced at the older bender confusedly. Who is that? She questioned, gesturing at the statue. Oh, that's Avatar Roku, the avatar before me. Sokka arched an eyebrow at the statue of a very obviously Fire Nation man. You were a firebender. No wonder I didn't trust you. Sokka. Sun cut in seriously, looking at the other man with a piercing gaze. Show some respect. He was against the war before it even started, and if he hadn't died when he had, the war might not have even happened. He was one of most powerful avatars in history, and only betrayal ended his life. Geez, sorry. Sokka apologized sarcastically. Sun had nothing but respect for the previous avatar. When the spirits had been deciding his fate and his master had intervened with his idea, they had called on Roku to decide. The dead avatar had pondered the situation for a minute before accepting, his own fate obviously weighing in on his decision. Sun, hide. Coming back from his thoughts, the blonde bender blinked in surprise, finding that the others had hid themselves and were motioning for him to do the same, pointing at the doorway. Firebender. Glancing at the shadow advancing on the door, Sun quirked an eyebrow. That's not a firebender, he replied, watching as the ears on the shadow's head bounced. Firebenders don't have big, floppy ears. They peeked around the statues they had been hiding behind and looked at the source of the shadow, which was a small, white-furred animal with brown markings around its white eyes. Nor are they lemurs. Aang's eyes went wide and sparkly somehow, his gaze fixed on the lemur. A lemur, he announced happily, moving from behind the statue. Sokka did the same, though his intent was very different. Dinner, he muttered, drooling. Don't listen to that guy, little buddy. The young airbender said soothingly, slowly approaching the small animal. You're going to be my new pet. Sokka, who had been creeping up on the lemur, loudly called, not if I get my hands on him first. The lemur was startled, his fur puffing out as he screeched and ran away from the two boys chasing after him. Aang and Sokka disappeared down the hallway, calling for the lemur, leaving Katara and Sun behind. They traded amused looks before bursting out into laughter and following after the two. You'd never guess that Sokka is supposed to be the older one. Katara said with a smile as they walked down the hallway. Sun made to reply but stopped when he looked ahead. Sitting in the middle of the otherwise bare wall was a small stone gargoyle, shaped like a monkey holding something out. Was that there before? He asked Katara, approaching the gargoyle. No, it wasn't. She replied confusedly. How did it get there? The blonde bender looked up at the stone monkey, his gaze falling to the object it was presenting. Sitting in the small furry stone hands was a small leather pouch with a character sewn onto it with black thread. Reaching out, Sun carefully took the pouch away and held it in his hands. It was very light, almost like a feather. The sound of creaking brought their eyes back to the small statue, which was no longer a statue. The suddenly living monkey winked at them before fading away, leaving behind a single orange hair. That faded into dust, leaving only the pouch and a lot of questions. What was that? Katara asked, shocked by the strange turn of events. That was my master. Sun replied distantly, turning the pouch over in his hands. He wanted me to have whatever's in this thing. Though it seems empty. The younger waterbender wisely backed up as he pulled the pouch open. With a loud pop, something emerged from the pouch at great speed, hitting Sun in the face and sending him to the ground while whatever it was gently floated to rest on the floor. Katara reached out gingerly and poked the mass of wispy golden fluff, her eyes going wide. "This is a cloud," she announced in disbelief, poking the cloud. "And it's solid." Sun sat up, rubbing his forehead, and laid a hand on the golden cloud. "What the? This shouldn't be physically possible," he mumbled before slapping his forehead. "Right, it's from my master, so it came from the spirit world. What does it do, though? Maybe it's a bed," Katara wondered, feeling the soft texture of the oddly solid cloud. Sun shook his head. "Nah, it's too small for that, maybe you sit on it." They traded shrugs and carefully planted their rears on the golden cloud, finding it to be a comfortable seat, though the space was kind of cramped, forcing them to sit very closely on it, not that either of them particularly minded. "So, what does this thing do?" she questioned as they sat on cloud. Sun shrugged. "I don't know, maybe it." The cloud shuddered lightly, and that was all the warning they got before the cloud lifted up and shot out of the temple in a blur of gold, leaving behind a trail of golden mist and their surprised screams, both of which faded shortly. Wind whipped into their faces as they flew at breakneck speeds, soaring and swooping through the mountains. Katara had her arms tightly wrapped around Sun's middle, both of them leaning back from the speed with their hair blowing in the wind, screaming as the cloud flew through the sky. Sun was smacking at the solid cloud underneath him, shouting, "Stop!" repeatedly. It flipped over in response, drawing a panicked cry from both of them, but instead of falling off as they should have, they remained stuck to the cloud as it flew, dipping their heads into a freezing cloud and freezing their hair in place with a layer of frost. It eventually slowed down, allowing the two benders to open their eyes and see that they had been carried above the clouds. The sun shone off of the fluffy white masses, with the tallest mountains peeking through the blanket of clouds. "Wow," Katara murmured, taking in the sight. "This is beautiful." "Yeah," Sun whispered, gazing at the view laid before them, his hand unconsciously moving to Katara's around his middle. Becoming aware of the contact, they blushed heavily and coughed, with Sun moving his hands down to the cloud. "Okay, let's try to steer this thing," he muttered, pulling on part of the golden mist. They leaned to the left and the cloud responded by beginning a long, curling loop on the golden trail it left behind, leading back to the southern air temple. They soared through the sky, passing over the blanket of clouds and mountain spires as they made their way back to the temple, quietly enjoying the view and contact between them. "It's just like my master to send a gift that pranks me first," Sun said to Katara, who looked up from resting her chin on his shoulder. "Really? Does he pull pranks like this a lot?" she asked, silently wondering how she hadn't seen the armor under his torso clothing and why it was so warm. Sun snorted in a mixed rueful and amusement. "All the time. He's a master prankster. Part of my training with him would be avoiding a gauntlet of pranks and traps that he set around my bedroom, most of the time without telling me. I actually used to be more of prankster myself, but after spending so much time around my master, I kind of settled down on them." Katara snickered quietly, remembering the sight of her brother with a face covered in sea prune jelly or mashed seaweed. "He sounds like a handful," she commented lightly. "Oh, he is," Sun replied with a small smile. "I really didn't like him for a while, but I grew out of it and I'm grateful for the skills he gave me." They fell back into silence as the spire from the air temple poked out of the clouds, and they moved through the white bank and descended on the mountain top, though something was wrong. A plume of smoke and dust wafted through the air, coming from an area next to the temple, and the base of it was glowing a bright, incandescent blue. "Aang," Sun muttered, recognizing the color of spirit energy. He steered the cloud down to the mountain, landing next to a sprawled out Sokka, who was shielding his face from the swirling wind. "What happened?" Katara shouted over the screeching air. He found out that firebenders killed Gyatso. Her brother shouted back. The cloud, despite the wind, sat still on the mountain top as Sun started making his way to Aang, floating and glowing in a chaotically spinning sphere of air. It's the avatar state, he called to the water siblings. It activates in times of danger and pain. We need to calm him down before he shreds the temple and us. Aang, Katara shouted desperately, I know you're upset. We would be, too. We were. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love. The Fire Nation took our mother away, just like they did with the Airbenders and you. But it's okay, Aang, we're your family, now. The self-contained storm began to die, and Aang slowly descended to the ground in front of the untouched skeleton wearing tattered monk robes and a battered wooden amulet, his arrows glowing softly. The trio quickly approached the young man and swept him up into the center of a group hug. We're all here for you, Aang, Sokka said softly. We aren't going to let anything happen to you. Sun muttered as the sobbing boy was wrapped in their blanket of arms. Promise. Aang sniffled tiredly. I'm sorry, guys. It wasn't your fault, Katara said comfortingly, squeezing him. It's okay. You were right, the last airbender said forlornly. The Fire Nation did find this temple, and if they found this one, that means they found all of the others, too. He bowed his head. I really am the last of my people. They back away just a little as Sun raises his hand, air coalescing in his palm to form a swirling sphere. Not entirely the last, Aang. The second to last airbender said with a small smile. You know, I've never been formally taught how to airbend, if only there was someone who could teach me. Aang gave a watery smile as he scrubbed at his eyes. That's right, I am a master airbender, that means you have to call me, Sifu. He said with a light chuckle. They joined him, the somber mood lifting slightly, and left for the temple. Sokka sighed as he watched Katara talking to Aang, who was looking up at the statue of Avatar Roku. What I want to know is, how did the Fire Nation find the air temples? He asked quietly. Sun's face became like stone. This is a war, Sokka, he muttered tonelessly. And every war has sides, and every side has its traitors. The younger man frowned, before his eyes went wide in dismay. Wait, you're saying that there were airbenders who betrayed the others and led the Fire Nation to the temples? The blonde man nodded shortly, causing Sokka to lean against a wall. Why do you think that? He finally asked, looking disturbed. Sun sighed heavily and turned away from the room, his words drifting back to Sokka like an icy breeze, the forewarning of a blizzard closing in. In war, every side has its traitors, in every war. And war. War never changes, comma. The rasped metal and heavy cloth echoed through the opulent red halls of the Fire Nation Palace as a cloaked man strode smoothly through the corridors, his heavy black and red cape dragging across the clean floor. He approached a door guarded by two men in full armor, holding ornamental spears made from gold, their heads shaped like fire. The guards froze as the man walked past them, pausing in front of the heavy doors they guarded. Sweat began to bead on their brows as a stifling silence echoed like a death knell. It was broken by the light clinking of metal on wood as two gold pieces bounced on the ground. You didn't see anyone. The man rasped through a mask of some sort that covered everything from his nose to his chin in dull red material. Sulphurous yellow-red eyes peered above the edge of the mask, and below the beaked peak of his hood, daring the two men to give him anything less than a satisfactory answer. The two men nodded quickly. Good. The cloaked man slipped through the doors, the absence of his presence making the guards sigh in relief before retrieving the coins on the floor. The cloaked man stopped before a throne made of 4 red pillars decorated with golden dragons, elevated above the floor with a line of fire separating it from the rest of the room. A man sat on the throne, gazing imperiously down at the other, a dark smirk on his lips, his smooth amber eyes gleaming with ambition. You've arrived exactly when I was thinking of sending for you, like always. The Fire Lord proclaimed, his smooth, dark voice echoing through the room and above the crackling flames. I had the feeling you would be in need of my services. The cloaked man replied simply. The Fire Lord nodded. I do. My sages have just become aware that the Avatar has come back from whatever hole he was hiding in. The other man crossed his arms. You want me to hunt the Avatar? It was not a question. Yes, I do. I want him brought before me, so that I can look him in the eyes while I burn him from the inside out. But, barring that, I want him dead and out of the way of my ambitions. He replied, the fire in front of him flaring in response to his anger. Double my usual price. The cloaked man retorted quickly. The Fire Lord smirked. I was prepared to offer you more than triple. This will be the greatest hunt of my career, the greatest target I could imagine. He replied softly, clenching his hands into fists. For that alone, I would do it for free, but money is necessary. I will need half of it now, and a loose timeline. Oh, the Fire Lord questioned smoothly. And why is that? The other man shifted. Every avatar has some method of getting around quickly, and this one is from the air nomads, which mean he has a sky bison, and those are very hard to track. The Fire Lord snapped his fingers, and a servant scurried from the shadows and presented a simple wooden chest to the cloaked man. He took the chest and slipped it into his cloak, nodding slowly. Very well. The hunt is on. Don't disappoint me, Hawk. Hawk chuckled darkly. When have I ever, Ozai? As the cloaked man left silently, Fire Lord Ozai tilted his head back, a deep laugh emerging from his throat, building in volume until it echoed through the palace, sending fearful shivers down the spines of those who heard the satisfied, insane sound. One person ignored the laughter, an ornamental brush forgotten as a missive was clutched between sharp nails painted crimson. Long ebony hair fell down her back, her amber eyes scanning the words on the paper. As she finished reading, Princess Azula stroked the ink depicting the name Naruto. I always knew.